Hello students, in this session I will discuss qualifying relative. So a dependent may be a qualifying child or a qualifying relative. So if you want to claim an individual as your dependent, then that individual should be your qualifying child or your qualifying relative. I have discussed who can be your qualifying child in another video. In this video I will discuss who can be claimed by you as your qualifying relative. Alright. So you are the taxpayer and you may claim an individual as your qualifying relative if certain conditions are met. Here we have four conditions. So all the four conditions must be met that you may claim an individual as your qualifying relative and may claim that individual as your dependent. All right. So you are a taxpayer and you want to claim an individual as your qualifying relative, then that individual is member of your household. So the individual is member of the taxpayer's household for the entire year or related to the taxpayer. So you can claim an individual as your qualifying relative, but that person is staying in your house, is member of your household. So if your distant relative or your friend is staying in your household for the entire year, then you may claim your friend as your qualifying relative or your distant relative as your qualifying relative because that person is staying in your household for the entire year, provided other conditions are also met. So any person, any individual who is staying in your household for the entire year can be claimed by you as your qualifying relative, or that individual is related to you. But how? So you are the taxpayer and you want to claim an individual as your qualifying relative, and that individual should be either staying with you for the entire year in your household, or that individual is related to you. How that individual is related? So that individual is your child. So here I'm talking about your son, daughter, stepson, stepdaughter, adopted son, adopted daughter, foster son, foster daughter, your child, or descendant of your child. So you want to claim an individual as your qualifying relative, and that individual is your grandson, granddaughter, or great grandson, or great granddaughter. You may claim that individual as your qualifying relative. So you may claim your great grandson as your qualifying relative, or your granddaughter as your qualifying relative. You can claim your father or mother as your qualifying relative, or the ascendants. So you can claim your grandfather or grandmother or great grandfather, great grandmother as your qualifying relative. You can also claim your father's brother or father's sister as your qualifying relative, or your mother's brother or mother's sister as your qualifying relative. You can claim your stepfather or stepmother as your qualifying relative. You can claim your brother or sister as your qualifying relative. You can claim your brother's son as your qualifying relative, your brother's daughter as your qualifying relative, or your sister's son as your qualifying relative, or sister's daughter as your qualifying relative. Now let's talk about your in-laws. They may also be claimed as your qualifying relative. So you may claim your son-in-law, daughter-in-law as your qualifying relative. You may claim your father-in-law as your qualifying relative, your mother-in-law, brother-in-law, sister-in-law as your qualifying relative. So you may claim your son-in-law, daughter-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law, and sister-in-law as your qualifying relative. All right. So if you want to claim someone as your qualifying relative, then that person is staying in your household for the entire year or someone who is related to you. And this definition of relationship is broad. Now, another condition is that the individual is not the qualifying child of the taxpayer or any other taxpayer. So if you want to claim B as your qualifying relative, then you cannot claim B as your qualifying child. If you can claim B as your qualifying child, then B cannot be your qualifying relative. Third condition, the individual's gross income for the year is less than $4,400. This is the limit for 2022. All right. So you want to claim B as your qualifying relative? Then what is B's gross income for the year? B's gross income for the year should be less than $4,400. And the last condition is that the taxpayer provides over half of the individual's support for the year. So you are the taxpayer and you want to claim B as your qualifying relative, then you provide more than half of B's support for the year. When I say support, I mean everything an individual needs, all his necessities, whether it is food, shelter, clothes, medical care, dental care, education, transport, recreation, everything, every necessity. And you provide more than 50% of the individual's support for the year. You pay for that more than 50%. Now, if you alone do not provide more than 50% of the individual support, but two or more people together provide more than 50% of individual support. For example, you want to claim B as your qualifying relative and you provide only 30% of B support. But there are other individuals, for example, individual E and individual F. They also support B and they provide 15% and 12%. So now you alone do not provide more than 50% of individual support, but you, along with E and F, provide more than 50%. Yes, you three together provide 57%. This is more than 50% of B support. Now, in such a case, you have to consider rules regarding multiple support agreement. So you have to consider rules regarding multiple support agreement to check whether you meet this condition or not. Although you're not providing more than 50% of B support, but still it may be considered that you are providing more than 50%. It may be considered that you meet this condition, that you satisfy this condition. For that, you have to check the rules regarding multiple support agreement. And I have discussed rules regarding multiple support agreement in another video. All right. So if all these four conditions are met, then you can claim an individual as your qualifying relative. All right, students. I hope this was helpful. We'll connect again. Goodbye.